Great Earth. My name is Dan. I hope you are well. We're quite a bit to get into today. Hopefully be able to get into all of it. The main part of the story is just the last few words, the Florida fish kill. Another fish kill hits Biscayne Bay after record flooding. We're devastated. Scientists warn fish kill is being fueled by climate change. It's deja vu all over again as another fish kill hits Biscayne Bay, the fourth in as many years. This is unfortunately not the first time we've seen this type of event, Miami-Dade Chief Bay Water Resources Officer Lauren Parra said. We're devastated to see these reports, certainly so early in the rainy season. Since Saturday, upwards of 2,000 fish by some estimates have been seen floating on the surface. Okay, this is important. Typically, when you only are seeing X amount of fish on the surface of the water that are dead, you're just seeing a very small percentage that's floating to the surface. Since Saturday, upwards of 2,000 fish by some estimates have been seen floating on the surface of northern Biscayne Bay following the torrential rains that submerged South Florida last week. The event has spanned from Morningside to North Bay Village all the way up to 95th Street. We're seeing very low salinity, which is unusual, which tells us there's a significant amount of fresh water flowing into the bay, explained Lisa Badafina, Director of Miami-Dade's Department of Environmental Resource Management. The two hotspots are conspicuous triggers of past events, the Biscayne Canal and the Little River, two of the dirtiest bodies of water in all of Miami-Dade County. Both locations have been overflowing with stormwater since June 11th. Here's a graphic here. We can see here the floodwater starting to churn. Little River and Biscayne Bay, Biscayne Canal from June 1st to June 18th. The graph above shows the flows from the Little River at rates above over 2,000 cubic feet per second since Thursday, so this is serious. Floodwater is extremely contaminated and has sewage in it. Potential septic tank effluent, contamination from chemicals, pet waste debris, and all this stuff floating around, explained Rachel Silverstein, who leads Miami Waterkeeper. And it's all eventually draining into Biscayne Bay and into the canals that lead into the bay. That dangerous nutrient-loaded water contains critically low oxygen levels. So far, the toadfish have been most impacted. Those are our bottom-dwelling fish, where we mostly see the lowest values of dissolved oxygen. It's another blow to already fragile Biscayne Bay that's no longer resilient enough to withstand the effects of so much water coming in so quickly. It's worrying scientists because these no-name storms are becoming more intense and happening more often. We're seeing more and more frequent catastrophic rain events in South Florida, and really, the underlying root cause of that is climate change, said Silverstein. As our planet continues to heat up, climatologists warn that this can become the new normal. The warmer the air, the more moisture can be held by the atmosphere. For every degree Celsius, the atmosphere can hold 7% more moisture. J. Natha Obasekera, the head of Florida International University's Sea Level Solutions Center, said, if all of that excess moisture falls, the volume or depth of rainfall could be higher in the future, and that is what we expect. Obasekera said South Florida has accumulated about 7 to 9 inches of sea level rise in the past 30 years, depending on the location. But what's concerning is that most of it happened in the last 5 to 10 years, meaning that sea level rise is accelerating. And when the sea is rising, all that extra water and extra pressure will cause the groundwater levels to be elevated. Obasekera further explained that this, combined with the intensification of rainfall, is causing the compound flooding that South Florida has become more familiar with. So I call it a triple whammy, All of them act together to make flooding worse, he said. And that's what's going on in our region. Yoka are DT Roca, the executive director of the CLEO Institute, which works with policymakers and stakeholders to build climate resiliency and climate action, calls these events unnatural disasters exacerbated by a warming climate. We need to understand that these events are anything but normal. These rain bombs events are becoming more often, more frequent. These are not our traditional tropical storm events, as some of our elected officials have said on television. The stakes have never been higher. Ardita Roca says it's time to act urgently and dramatically reduce human emissions of heat-trapping gases that are spewing into our atmosphere to slow down our planet's warming. We don't need miracles, we don't need silver bullets. We have the solutions, and it's about scaling them with speed and intentionality. So that gives me tremendous hope. DeSantis government, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis rejects climate change rationale for record-breaking rain. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and his administration are pushing back against the assertion that the storm had anything to do with climate change.
This news story was written by Lori Rosa. DeSantis rejects climate change rationale for record-breaking rain. The rain has become political in Florida. As residents and businesses in South Florida assess the damage from this week's historic rainfall and floods, Governor Ron DeSantis and his administration pushed back against assertions that the storm had anything to do with climate change. A number of records were set as the storm known as Invest 90L inundated roads from Sarasota to West Palm Beach. The Republican governor declared a state of emergency for South Florida, but at a news briefing Friday, he downplayed the idea that the storm was unusual. He said there have been similar events going back decades. This clearly is not unprecedented, he said. I think the difference is, you compare 50 to 100 years ago to now, there's just a lot more that's been developed, so there's a lot more effects that this type of event can have. His communications team also made light of the storm, dismissing it as typical summer rainfall. Christina Pushaw, the governor's former press secretary, who is now an analyst with the state, wrote on X, "Welcome to the rainy season. South Florida is in the tropics. There will be thunderstorms for the next 4-5 months. No storm-related fatalities were reported, but some communities experienced waist-deep flooding, and residents needed to be rescued." The brouhaha over how to characterize the storm came a month after DeSantis signed a bill that removes most references to climate change in state law. The legislation, which is set to take effect July 1st, eliminates climate change as a priority in making energy policy decisions, even though Florida routinely faces threats from extreme heat, deadly hurricanes, and toxic algae blooms. Florida Democrats, in turn, took jabs at DeSantis's team for diminishing the storms just as hurricane season gets underway. The season started June 1st, and forecasters predict it could be one of the most active on record. They also noted that DeSantis signed a state budget this week that vetoes about $205 million in stormwater, wastewater, and sewer projects across the state. Living in Florida, what we're seeing now is not just the same kind of weather that's been happening for 1,000 years. said State Representative Darrell Campbell, a Democrat whose district is in Broward County. We see the impacts of climate change on our day-to-day lives, and we see a governor who vetoes what the legislature passed unanimously to help deal with it. Last month, a record-breaking heat wave enveloped the state, with Key West registering a heat index of 115 degrees. The summer of 2023 was the hottest on record for several cities in Florida. DeSantis and his administration scoff at critics who say the state should be doing more to address climate change. What amazes me about the current discussion on Florida's weather is that the left seems to believe that Gov. Ron DeSantis can control how much it rains, but he just refuses to use his power to do so. DeSantis Press Secretary Jeremy Redfern wrote on X, "The storm arrived 14 months after another rain bomb hit South Florida, dropping 22.5 inches on Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport in one day. Last year's storm knocked the city's main hospital offline for all but emergency procedures, shorted electrical equipment at City Hall, and left thousands of travelers stranded. Both that system and this week's deluge bear the fingerprint of human-caused climate change. In a warmer world, the atmosphere can hold more moisture. That means rainfall rates are getting heavier and extremes are becoming more common. When DeSantis vetoed storm-related projects this week, he said local governments can find the money instead from the State Department of Environmental Regulation. He also pointed to his resilience budget, which includes more than $1.2 billion for projects such as $17.8 million to improve technology infrastructure at the state's new Emergency Operations Center. DeSantis has pledged to focus on energy affordability rather than climate change. The law he signed in May bans offshore wind turbines and weakens regulations on natural gas pipelines. We don't want our energy policy driven by climate ideology, DeSantis said Friday. When that happens, people pay more and the energy is less reliable. A previous version of this article
Florida's screwed. You want to know why Florida is screwed? It's not just because of Ron DeSantis. Here we go. Bleaching watch, bleaching alerts, bleaching level 1, level 2. And the currents. It's not going away. The Gulf of Mexico is about to experience an extreme bleaching event. Coral reefs will let go of their algae. They'll cause toxic algae blooms on the surface. This is pretty dramatic looking. And we're seeing it only get worse. Not this one. This is from legalinsurrection.com. What? U.S. Pennsylvania professor blames summer heat wave on climate change. Oh, well, it's pretty short. Let's
Michael Mann, he's the Presidential Distinguished Professor of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania. Also, he is the author of Our Fragile Moment, How Lessons from Earth's Past can help us survive the climate crisis. All right, Michael, obviously this is not the first conversation we've had about this. It's sadly not going to be the last. This heat wave in the Northeast, the Great Lakes, could be the longest in 30 years, so about a generation. Is this what summer's going to look like from now on?
Yeah, hi, Brianna. It's good to be with you. And unfortunately, yes, this is a glimpse of not only what our future will look like, but in fact, it will look quite a bit worse than this. We will see more widespread and hotter and longer lasting heat waves in the future if we continue to heat up the planet. And so all of this gets worse if we continue pumping carbon pollution into the atmosphere and warming up the planet. That's the bad news. The good news is we can still do something about it. We have to stop making the problem worse by getting off fossil fuels.
How much of a health risk are we talking about here, and what can people do to protect themselves?
Yeah, so certainly heat risk, heat waves, extreme heat is sometimes called the silent killer because it may not be as dramatic as some of the other extreme weather events, tornadoes and hurricanes and wildfires that lead to human mortality. But in fact, extreme heat leads to far greater mortality, especially among the young and the older. And in particular, when nighttime temperatures stay very high, and the human body isn't able to cool down at night and recover from that heat. That is particularly a problem. And that's one of the things we're seeing with this heat wave, not only very high temperatures, but we're going to see very high low temperatures.
So the heat waves are colliding, of course, with hurricane season. And then when you look out west, an earlier than usual fire season. What does this tell us about the bigger picture when it comes to climate change?
Yeah, we're seeing, record flooding down in Florida. We are seeing early wildfires out west in California. We are seeing extreme heat in the Midwest and the eastern United States. And all of this is actually connected to a very persistent jet stream pattern. When the jet stream sort of gets stuck in place and those big high and low pressure centers get stuck in place, you have extreme rainfall and flooding, or extreme heat and drought and wildfires day after day. And that's what we're seeing. And here's a very important point. The fact that we're going to see more extreme heat on a warmer planet, that's obvious. That's an obvious impact of human-caused warming. But one of the subtle impacts that we're just beginning to really understand is how the actual pattern of the way the planet is warming up is changing the behavior of the jet stream and leading to these very persistent extreme configurations that give us these unprecedented extreme weather events. And the climate models that we use to predict the future appear to actually underestimate the impact that climate change is having in creating these very persistent jet stream patterns and many of these extreme weather events. And so, if anything, our models are actually underestimating some of the key impacts. As I like to say, uncertainty isn't our friend here.
Yeah, that is so alarming. I do think that people are hearing the alarms, specifically in some places where they can't get insurance, right? Whether it's for flooding or it's for the threat of wildfires. There are people who are really experiencing this in a very real way, Michael. So what do they need to be doing? What do we all need to be doing to try to reverse course here?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, uninsurability, as I like to say, is the first step to uninhabitability, right? If we can't insure our homes against extreme wildfires and floods, then pretty soon we're losing, vast amounts of area where human beings can live on a planet with a growing population and growing demand on space, on food, on water. So what can we do to make this, to prevent this from getting worse? And again, that's the good news. One of the things that we've come to understand over the last decade and a half is that the warming of the surface of the planet halts fairly quickly when we bring our carbon emissions to zero. And so there is a very direct and immediate impact of our effort to decarbonize our economy. Now, here's the thing. We've got to bring carbon emissions down by about 50% over the next decade and down to zero within a couple decades if we're going to prevent the warming the planet from warming beyond roughly 3 degrees Fahrenheit, where we'll see far worse consequences of climate change. And so, as I like to say, there is urgency, but there is agency. It's not too late for us to act.
Yeah, we just have to hear those alarms, and they are going off very loudly. Michael Mann, always great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I thank you for joining me here. If you haven't already, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out immensely and keeps me motivated in putting out videos similar to this material. Death toll tops 1,000 after Hajj marked by extreme heat. From AFP. The death toll from this year's Hajj has exceeded 1,000. An AFP tally said on Thursday more than half of them unregistered worshippers who performed the pilgrimage in extreme heat in Saudi Arabia. This is terrible. 658 Egyptians who passed away. 630 were unregistered pilgrims. 658 Egyptians? That's some 65% or so were Egyptians that perished due to the extreme heat. 125 degrees Fahrenheit are 51.8 degrees Celsius. Mecca, 7 times. There's so many people, so hot. 125.9 degrees. Walk around 7 times. People are dying. Suffering greatly. It is 51.8 degrees Celsius or 125 degrees Fahrenheit this week at Grand Mosque in Mecca. This is... I did see some videos regarding these deaths, and it's... people are just... bodies are everywhere. It's comforting. We don't know how many more people perish as a result of these rituals. It is scorching hot. 125.9 degrees Fahrenheit. This is absolutely unreal. And the death toll here is unbelievable. People are dying walking around 7 times. It is heartbreaking. It is strange, I think, that the majority of these deaths have been Egyptians. All told, around 10 countries have reported 1,081 deaths during the annual pilgrimage, one of the 5 pillars of Islam which all Muslims with the means must complete at least once. The Hajj, whose timing is determined by the lunar Islamic calendar, fell again this year during the oven-like Saudi summer. 51.8 degrees Celsius, 125 degrees Fahrenheit, this week at the Grand Mosque in Mecca. Absolutely unreal levels of danger, heat. Absolutely devastating to hear, read. It's tragic. These people pushing themselves harder and harder. Temperatures, this is insane. Levels of heat. Absolutely unreal level of heat. So, okay. Where it says unregistered pilgrims, there's the diplomat said the main cause of death among Egyptian pilgrims was the heat, which triggered complications related to high blood pressure and other issues. Of the 658 Egyptians who passed away, 630 were unregistered pilgrims. This is unreal. Last was reporting over 500. Now it's over 1,000. And people are still attempting. People are still going through with it, regardless of how many bodies they see. Terrifying. It is terrible. Alright. Thank you again for joining me. If you haven't already, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It helps keep me motivated and into putting out content related to climate related videos. Tragedy. Tragedy. People trying to complete this at least once if they have the means, it says. But it's tragic. Trying to complete this and literally just walking around dead bodies in the street. They're dying due to heat stroke, heat related illnesses. It is terrifying to think about. People are still having to go through with it, even though that they're surrounded by death and heat. 125 degrees Fahrenheit or 51.8 degrees Celsius. These are temperatures where, with enough humidity, more people would die in Marseille. Terrible. Very tragic. But yeah, it looks like most of them are Egyptians. Out of the 1,081 deaths, 658 are Egyptians. Unreal. Also, I have a Patreon now. One Great Earth. After, well, the whole story's on here if you care to read it. Membership is free, and I'd very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. I believe that is all the time I have for now. I thank you very much for joining me. Please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. And I will be back with another stream. Thank you very much. Have a good day.